how is it working in an environment that is a male-dominated environment, that is absolutely full of testosterone? Has it challenged you in a positive way? Have you found limitations because of your gender?
So I find actually that since I am the only woman in my entire department, I do find sometimes that, so it's a benefit. I do use the lawyer thing as a shield and a sword. So whenever I go into a meeting, and generally I'm the only woman there, I always make sure that they know that I'm a lawyer, because that often makes me legitimate. So I'll say something like, oh, well, we lawyers like to drink lots of water when we talk. So that, I have a reason to be here. But I think the unfortunate thing is that in my male-dominated industry, you do have to, unfortunately, legitimize yourself, because since when you're the only woman in the room, there will always be a question about why you're actually there. And so while I don't get it from the men I work with, and I have never received any gender discrimination from the ball players that I've worked with, when you go into a meeting, there really is like a big question mark. And I'd say
Mick, you're in an industry that is vast majority of women in the travel, I'm going to stick with the travel
space, yep.
space, yet none of them are the CEOs.
Yes.
Talk to us about that.
About 65% of the workforce in hospitality are women, and the more senior you go, the less women there are in the room. And as Jennifer said, at the top, there are practically none. I can count on one hand how many CEOs that are female in this space. And it's mind-boggling, because you can understand it in historical, maybe financial services, in agriculture, right? Where you have to bring them in and bring them up. They're already in. So one of the things that I had done was I started a nonprofit called Win It, which is a women's leadership organization to change those numbers and to address exactly that. What I found, and very similar for myself, I was never discriminated against. In fact, early in my career, I refused to join any women's leadership groups, because my thought was, if we're supposed to be equal, why do we have to talk about it? Just get the job done, just do it. And I found that I was fortunate in my 20s and my 30s that it didn't affect me. But it was almost as soon as I became managing director, and I'm looking around, and out of the thousands of, there were 4,000 managing directors, there were a couple hundred women. And that's when it really hit me that we have to do something different about it. And I had two bosses, one was New York and one was London. And both of them had leadership meetings each week, and both of them were all men except for me. And what I found is, I think sense of humor, which clearly you have applied, Jean, and we can see that, it helps, right? It does. And it kind of gets people to lighten up. But you're also going to challenge people with it. You're not going to roll over and be a doormat with sense of humor. But one of the things that one of the guys said to me was that I really should lower my heels, because I wore heels a couple of inches, because I was taller than the men that were in the room. Now, guess how high the heels were that I came in with the next day, okay? 5 inches. So the point being, you know what, I'm not going to play that game, let's let it go, and I'm not going to address it, I'm not going to say anything about it, but it is real, and it is there. And I think part of the responsibility that we have is to bring up and speak for the women that are in the room that aren't finding their voice, and make sure that we're doing that. And in the hospitality industry specifically, I can't tell you how many times I'm in a room, in a meeting, and a woman will say something, and sometimes it's quieter. Sometimes it starts with the word sorry. Sorry, but I have a fabulous idea, but if no one listens, that's okay. Right? And then a man, gentlemen, it's fabulous that you guys are here. But sometimes a man will pick up on that, and it might be that he didn't hear her, frankly. But it's our responsibility to then say, you know what, you're right. And when Mary said that, I think she had something a bit more to add to it. Mary, take that on. Say more about what you were going to say. It's about being aware of it and supporting each other. And the men that I work with, and the men that we have this conversation with, they watch out for that too, and they make sure that they're mindful of it.
Thank you. Nowadays, 50% of the MBAs hired into financial services are women.
Yes.
Actually, it's 51%.
Yes,
So there's more women. Then you move on a little bit,
yes,
and they're paid less,
yes.
and they're promoted less.
They're paid less as they elevate.
Yes,
You know, there's
after a
parity,
couple of years.
there's probably parity for the associate.
one.
There's day
Probably
one
the last
parity.
time there's parity.
Mhm.
How does that happen? Financial institutions, for the most part, are really about the numbers. So you can't disguise the fact that your women VPs are actually, on average, paid less.
You can when there's a lack of transparency between different groups, Jennifer. And I think,
Mhm.
like, you know, what we have seen is a greater focus on sharing information across groups so that there is a normalization and understanding that there are factors that influence some of those pay changes that are entirely legitimate, and then there are
Right.
others that aren't. So when you come out of an MBA program and you're an associate, you're almost, for the first 3 years, going to be paid the same no matter what, no matter how you perform. It's kind of the equitable, there's very little variation. It's when you hit the VP and the director level that the bands start to expand. And that also happens to be the same time that women are having kids. They're getting married, they're deciding to have
I'm
children.
waiting for you to say that.
Deciding to have children, and so they're going on maternity leave. Or they're, you know, having issues with childcare or whatever it needs to be. And so there's a view that that can have a negative influence, either on their, you know, by taking maternity leave or by having to step away from the office and not be present like their male peers. I think there is an increasing awareness, at least in my institution, about the pervasiveness of the impact. Because a lot of times what happens is women understand that and they decide to opt out. And so we see, to Jennifer's point, our incoming MBA class was, you know, just about 50% female. And that would be in the consumer bank as well as investment bank, corporate bank, and trading. But as you escalate through VP director and up to managing director, the numbers become increasingly small. You know, and so that's the challenge that we're trying to face. We're trying to work through.
And some would argue it's not the right industry for women.
You know, I think it has always been a prestige industry that has driven a lot of people into it for the focus on the cash, right? But it's cash that comes at a cost, and I think that you can only be really successful if you love what you do. It's kind of hard to love investment banking.
Some days it's fun.
Some days, well, for the first year, you know, it's kind of an endurance battle. And then the job changes, right? You're really technically focused. You know, there's a camaraderie, and then you essentially become a salesman, right? A really highly compensated and technical salesman, but the bar for success changes from being able to brute force models and PowerPoint, you know, and build, you know, beautiful presentations, you know, in your sleep, to the fact that you're calling on clients and having to generate revenue. I think that aspect of it, Jennifer, is, you know, women aren't as comfortable in building those client relationships and then always asking something for it. So, and it's a ruthless business in that you constantly have a revenue target. The revenue target will generate your bonus, you know, will be a contributor to your bonus criteria or your bonus payout. And if you don't make your numbers, you're out. So I think whereas I can say private equity is also a slog. There are fewer women in private equity than there are in banking. But I always loved my job. I learned so much, and the hours that I dedicated and was away from my kids really was something that I found inspirational and rewarding. So when it got really bad, I just kind of gritted and worked through it. So I made it through those years of VP and director so that I could eventually become a managing director, a group head, and now, you know, a senior executive at the bank.
Thank you. So in the legal profession, in financial services, in the hospitality industry, we've all experienced the fact that at the more senior levels, the numbers of women fall off. What do you think about quotas?
We have a problem in baseball with gender and diversity in front offices. So the commissioner formed a committee and the diversity pipeline committee, and I'm on that committee along with the 9 other gender and diverse people. Only 9 of us in all of professional all of baseball, but we decided in baseball that there has to be a pipeline because people aren't created fully formed to take assistant GM and GM jobs. So the whole point of this diversity committee is that in front offices there has to be an effort to get people like you guys who are just out of school, maybe with no experience, who have to start being developed into candidates who would be qualified as GMs and assistant GMs. Because I think a pipeline is much better than insisting that people have to get the experience to get there. You can't just get a job because you're a woman. And the problem is that it's sort of the chicken and the egg. Women aren't getting those entry-level jobs, at least in my sport. So we have to figure out a way for women to get those entry-level jobs and then work their way up. And that's sort of the template that we're using in baseball. And because I think baseball is different from any other business, because really, hell no, there are no, women really around. So that's how we're trying to combat it in my industry, and not just for women and for minorities and anybody who you don't see represented in the decision making in baseball front offices. So I don't know if that answers the question about quotas. I mean, I'm always a little queasy about quotas.
Yeah, but if you don't measure it, then how do you know you're making progress? And I do think that measuring it then allows you to diagnose the problem, like Jean is saying, which is, well, we can't really focus on the top, we need to focus on the bottom. And it's not necessarily, what are the objective functions that you're trying to optimize here? And it's diversity, and it's diversity for the sake of what? For us now, it's diversity for the sake of making better business decisions. Because if you have all the same type of people sitting around the table, you shouldn't be surprised that you have a suboptimal outcome. So it's about driving to increasing the diversity, and then creating an environment of advocacy, so that it isn't just women and minority that are focused on the outcomes, but the whole population. So I think the quotas probably not necessary, but understanding where you are and how you make progress is really important in all these solutions. And looking at it in the portfolio of, it's not just women, it's diverse women, it's it's men, it's white men, because otherwise you've got this fragmentation of populations when the unification of a group really will get you to the best outcome.
I was the chair of the Women's Leadership Council, representing the 150,000 women that were in the group that I was in. I believe in measuring 100%. But I think it is completely wrong to say that there's 2 openings, and because we don't have the right number of women, they should both go to a woman, even though a man is better qualified to take that position. So a quota and a mandate, I am completely against. However, measuring and making sure you have a path, because it's not just the right thing to do. You want diversity in thought leadership no matter what group you're assembling. And it's the only way to be successful. And if you need to look purely from a financial perspective, it is better business to do it. I think you can't do anything without it being women and men. And I will slightly disagree with a thought. I would never want to be the person that was better qualified but wasn't selected because of some other long-term strategy that I can't impact or change. And the slight disagreement, I will say, is what has worked well and you might want to consider is you've got your best candidates in front of you for a position. They may happen to be 3 men. And then you say, bring in the best qualified women to this. She will not get the job because she's not the best qualified. Bring her in and let's start building that pipeline. Let's talk to her about what she's missing. Let's put a specific strategy together to get her in that recruitment pipeline. So by automatically, and it's not saying check the box of everything, saying within our group of these people, who is the absolute next qualified female, and get her in the mix. And she doesn't get the job until she deserves to get the job, but you'll help her on having a more specific path in order to get there. And I wouldn't have any conversations without the men in the room. And I think it's fabulous that the gentlemen that are here today, because it's only something that we're going to fix and address by doing that together. You can't be isolating. You know, women aren't going to do anything about it.
Don't judge a book by a cover, right? That man is either a husband with children of his own. He's got sisters. He's got, you know, a grandmother that worked. There are ways that people are personally invested in this objective. You just have to make that connection and let them know that they can't let that bad behavior go on. And think about it in terms of, would you want your daughter to go through this at work? Would you want your sister to go through this at work? Would you want your gay brother to go? I mean, whatever it might be, because it is the same sort of systemic issue. And I do think you cannot really make a difference until you have that advocacy of men, and to reach out and make sure that it's a battle that we're all fighting together, and that the purpose isn't to make us feel good. It does, it's a byproduct of it, but really that it's to make the company perform better. And then there's now empirical, that used to be kind of a gut thing, now it's empirically proven. So, and look, you guys are all budding, emerging leaders, and so you can make those demands when you come into the organization about what the change needs to happen. A number of companies that are leading the way in that discussion. Right. And so whether you look at working mother or now working father. The other thing I would say is, my husband doesn't work, right? So recognize that sometimes the equation is for someone to step away. And that isn't always just the ladies in the room. Sometimes it's the husband, and it just got to the point, yeah, you started off the same, so did my husband and I. He went to Stanford, I went to Duke, right? You know, he had this great job in automotive industry, I went to financial services. Our income path started to diverge. So when I had when we had my daughter, and it got too much, and he said, okay, I'm quitting. And that's kind of what happened. So like, just recognize that, you know, don't always confine yourself to the linear solution. Sometimes you have to think outside the box. And be comfortable that you guys can make it work for you, not what other people think.
I'm a single mom of a 13-year-old, and before I went to the sperm donor, I talked to my boss. So I'm not the right one to ask that as far as the balance piece of it in that sense. But I think that the message that we have is there is no norm, there is no way of going about it. You have to do it in the way that works for you. And I think that the challenge is that even when you start advocating for that balance, it takes many years for corporations to catch up to that. So, you know, it's so smart that you're thinking about it now, so that when you are ready for that leap, you'll be better prepared.
I will warn you, may not want your husband home during those first couple weeks. Fundamentally, unfortunately, has started, and the revolution of change is starting in early childhood education now. We owe it to ourselves. America is drastically lacking some of our foreign competitors in that space, but we found as an institution we couldn't find the people because they weren't there. It wasn't that they were being discriminated against, there just weren't enough women in the highly technical fields, in computer programming, in places that we needed people so badly, quantitative analysis, and the women weren't there. So it's great to see at the early levels more and more girls focused on STEM. Public schools are more focused on it. You're seeing colleges invest in the space and try to offer a much more diverse offering. But starts in kindergarten.
Yeah, and it's programs like Girls Can Code
Yeah.
and things like that, and it's gotten much more pervasive and in terms of geographically across the U.S. and focusing on lower income as well as more affluent communities. And I do think that those are the efforts that we're seeing through our foundations in terms of reaching through our technology organizations and our philanthropic focus, and really trying to say, when we did the root cause analysis, because that's who we are, we're just analytical, it wasn't like, we'll go recruit at different colleges. They just aren't there.
I think Mick addressed it by change the conversation. You can be in the room. If you're going to walk out of the room, you're going to stay out of the room.
And part of it is also toughing up a little, right? And I don't, and so you're going to hear that. You're going to hear, this is just life, right? You're going to have, there's going to be women that talk about things that you don't necessarily agree with or what have you. But with the guys, it would be changing the conversation. And it would be, there were 2 times that I can think of where I didn't do it in front of people, but afterwards, if you say, I'm going to talk to you, Patrick, I won't say his last name, when I'm in the group one-on-one, when you're in this staff meeting and you say X, Y, Z, what do you think that feels like when you're a woman in the room? Oh, sorry, Mick, I don't really realize. I said, so don't do it. Just be aware. Talk about it, separately in private conversations, and it never happened again. So it's also just addressing it, because I guarantee you, if you get somebody one-on-one outside of that room and you're very direct with them, they're going to be embarrassed of themselves, of how they are. Or they may not be and say, oh my gosh, it's such a pain, I can't say X, Y, Z in the staff room. I don't care if you're not happy about that, but you're not going to do it, right? So it's kind of trying a few different things.
And that's why we've started this advocacy focus, which is really, it can't just be, the woman that's saying, you're behaving badly, you can't say it. It's got to come from their peers, right? And it actually has to come in the moment. And they've got to be called out for it. And so creating a culture that says we're not going to tolerate this, and it's going to change. It's not good. These things don't happen on a dime, right? But if all of a sudden Morgan Whitaker, who runs credit, says in his staff meeting, that's not, you can't, that's not acceptable, that's not how we treat teammates, then that will have an impact. And it will start cascading down. You don't have problems in the bottom, and you don't have problems in the top. It is this big, messy middle. And there are a lot of people that have been in their job for a long time, they have grown up, no one's ever told them they can't do stuff. And that's the source of the problem.
And part of the challenge, though, too, is you don't have that executive in the room all the time. It's really just the core team. It's not necessarily someone that's more senior. You don't put up with it.
And so
right?
That's really the message that we've taken from all, and this, we're doing it across all of our employee network. So it's not just the women's network that I lead in New York City. It's our, all of them across. And we've got things that are focused on parental, parents groups. We've got things focused on intergenerational groups, right? It's not just diversity populations, but really, and using that advocacy across every population so that we're treating everyone in the same manner, the same respect, and creating not only a diverse culture, but also one of inclusiveness.
And sometimes it's not even awareness, right? It's not that someone's purposely trying to make you uncomfortable. It's just, you know what, all right, I didn't even realize that was coming across that way.